you.
Thank you, Donna, as always, for that very warm welcome. And good evening, all. And thank you for being with us for what will be the last Health Inequalities Lecture of 2023. This year, I've had the pleasure to bring some wonderful speakers to your attention, covering such a diverse range of topics that impact our communities every day. We've heard about the challenges of living with HIV, when and how people should seek cancer treatment, and even what the NHS is doing to recover from the COVID pandemic, as well as much, much more. It has been a wonderful year, and I am looking forward to a similar program for 2024. But first, my friends, it gives me even more pleasure to welcome Professor Dame Carol Black for tonight's Q&A, which focuses on, as Donna was saying, the theme of healthier futures. Dame Carol has had such a rich and varied career, and I'm delighted that she is able to join us this evening. And friends, as I say, Dame Carol has had distinguished career holding some great roles and is currently chair of the British Library Board, chair of the Centre for Aging Better, chair of the board of Think Ahead, the government's fast stream training program for mental health social workers, and chair of UK Active. She's also the co-chair of NHS England's Expert Advisory Group on Employee Health and Wellbeing. She has authored 4 independent reviews for the UK government, first of the health of the working age population in 2008 as National Director for Health and Work, of sickness absence in Britain in 2011 as co-chair, and of employment outcomes of addiction to drugs or alcohol or obesity in 2016. Part 1 of a 4th independent review for government was published on the 27th February 2020 and provides a detailed analysis of challenges posed by drug supply and demand, including the ways in which drugs fuel violence. Part 2 was published on 8th July 2021 and focuses on drug treatment, recovery, and prevention. Friends, while we certainly won't have time to cover everything within 1 hour that we have with Dame Carol, I'm hoping our discussion can span the many different aspects of her work within the health sector. Hopefully, we will learn about the journey that brought her into medicine and touch upon some highlights from the years that follow, from becoming a global expert in the autoimmune disease scleroderma to championing better health within the workplace. Dame Carol's work has touched on many of the different factors that can cause health inequalities. So I'm hoping through our questions, we will be able to learn a little more about what has driven her views on how we can build up healthier communities. So Dame Carol, we are very lucky to have your company now this evening on this dark, cold evening, and really excited that you have been able to give up so much of your time to join us, to spend a little time with us. So first of all, a very, very warm welcome to you on this. I don't know about where you are, my friends, but here in Wembley, it's incredibly cold. So very warm welcome to you on this chilly evening. So without further ado, I'm just going to ask Carol about your early years of adulthood. I guess we probably, some of us who have been following your career will probably know that you started your career by doing a history degree. You read history at Bristol, but somehow decided to become a doctor instead. And how lucky we are that you decided to change your pathway. But I'm interested in finding out what made you change that path, please.
Fine. Well, I think I should never have read history. I think that was the first thing. I went to a local grammar school, took the 11 plus, of course, in those days. And when I did my O levels, because that's of course what you did at that time, I got the same sort of grades in science and the arts. I had a crush on the history master. And so instead of going into the science 6, I went into the arts 6 and decided I really wanted to understand what drove people, if you like, to make big decisions in the world. History seemed to me about individuals. Of course, that wasn't quite true. History is about lots of other things, but I thought it would be driven by personalities, and I was interested in people. I therefore pursued history as the degree I would do. When I got to Bristol, I really disliked it. I found it very boring. I had this fantastic teacher at school. And then I happened to be living in a hall of residence, and I shared a room with someone who was reading science. And then around us were a lot of vets and medics. And I began to think, really, I should have done something in the medical world, because it was about people. And I was really interested in doing something with people. I didn't think, because of course I had no A-level science, that I would be able to change, even though more and more as I did the history degree, I wanted to change. And so I then did a course in medical social work. So I trained as a social worker, a medical social worker. Don't have them anymore. They used to be called almoners in hospitals. But while I was doing that course, the woman in charge realized what I wanted to do was medicine. And I then had to decide, could I face going back to do the equivalent of A-levels and really starting a medical degree, which would make it 6 years. And I applied for medical school in my own university, which was Bristol, got in, but I had no funding. I come from a poor working class family in the Midlands. And so I went off on VSO abroad, and I thought they'd just give me pocket money, but they didn't. They paid my salary. So I wrote back to the university, said, can I have my place back for first MB? Because I was going to do the A-level. You know, in those days, there were 13 British universities that allowed you to enter medicine through first MB, when you did a very concentrated physics, chemistry and biology. If you passed, you could go into medicine. And they let me go back on the course. So I entered medical school at the age of nearly 25, actually, to do my first MB. You only had to get 50%. You didn't have to do very well to get through, and then started medicine. So I'm a late entry into medicine, really pleased I made that switch. I loved medicine. It's been a fantastic career.
A late entry, Carol, but a very, very welcome entry indeed. I'm sure many of our friends on Zoom will agree with that. And I particularly, am hugely a great fan of yours. So very well done indeed for changing your pathway so early in your adulthood. So Carol, you are indeed an international expert on scleroderma, and established the center at Royal Free Hospital here in London, which is renowned worldwide. And just tell us, please, if you will, how did you come to specialize in this area after changing from history to medicine, please?
Right. Well, I was doing my medical degree in Bristol, and I wanted to do the house job of the professor of medicine, who was Alan Reed. And I thought I wanted to be a liver doctor. That's what he was, a liver doctor. And in my head, I thought he was the best teacher. He taught medicine in a way that was just absolutely wonderful. He made you really, really want to be a very good doctor, because he made it so absolutely fascinating. And when I was his houseman, one night I admitted a young woman with acute renal kidney scleroderma. I'd never seen the disease before. I've read about it, of course, in books, but I mean, it is very uncommon. And with my registrar, and I'd only just qualified, we tried all night to control the blood pressure with the normal drugs that you have to control blood pressure at that time. And we were obviously failing. She was 26. And in the morning, it was his ward round. And when we got there, I said, look, we've done very badly during the night. The blood pressure is still horrendously high, and the kidneys are failing. And what do we do? And this was a man I thought was God, you know, he was sort of my hero. And it came as a huge shock to me when he said, there is nothing we can do. This is an incurable disease, and she will be dead within 3 weeks. In fact, she was dead within a week. And it had a huge impact on me. I thought even then, although I wasn't sure, I thought if ever I have the chance, I would like to do something for this disease. And then I put it a bit to the back of my mind and thought, well, no, I'm going to be a liver doctor like Alan Reed. And then Alan said to me, you can't be a gastroenterologist and be a liver doctor because you're too old, Carol. He said, you're 8 years older than everybody else going into medicine. And we, at that time, I don't know whether you remember, the number of consultants were capped, and gastroenterology was very full. And he said, go away and think about some medical specialties that aren't full, where you can pursue your career much more quickly, and then you can come back and talk to me. So quite frankly, I went away, and there were 3 at that time. There was rheumatology, dermatology, and care of the elderly. And I then thought, right, I'm going to do rheumatology, and I'm going to learn more about scleroderma. So, I mean, in a way, by him telling me I was too old to waste time in gastroenterology, he pushed me towards scleroderma. And I then did a research degree with him on fibroblast proliferation, because collagen is, of course, the protein that is so abnormal in scleroderma, and that really started my interest. So in a way, he did me a great service, because, you know, he gave me a disease which nobody knew much about, and which I was able to make a big difference to.
Thank you. And talking about care for elderly, Carol, you, as I said in my opening remarks, are chair of the Center for Aging Better. And with aging population, Carol, what barriers have been identified by the charity as existing for people over 50 who wants to participate fully in the workplace? And while you think about replying to that, Carol, let me just say to colleagues on the screen, I am really keen to bring you in with your questions as well. So if you haven't started thinking about questions, please do think about questions that you would perhaps want to put to Carol, and I'll try to bring you in as quickly as I possibly can. Thank you, Carol.
Well, I was interested in the Centre for Aging Better because it concentrates on ages 50 into early 70s. So it's sort of ensuring that people are growing older as well as possible, so that they can enjoy life and also work as long as seems appropriate to them. Because being in work on the whole, not always, but on the whole, is good for your health, both mental and physical. And for many people who live alone, work is a very important social function. And so when the role of chair came up, I thought, well, I'm really keen to do this and to try and help the centre develop its streams of work. So one of our big streams of work is enabling people to work well into their 60s if they want to, and be well enough to do that. As you probably know, we live in an ageist society, and work is extremely ageist. So, you know, on the whole, employers don't particularly give the same opportunities for training to people who are 50 plus and people who are under 50. They say they're not ageist at interview, but there's very good evidence that in fact older people do not do as well in looking for jobs as younger people. So what we've been trying to develop is we have a pledge, for example, which employers can sign up to, which is about making the pledge that you will, with your older workforce, you will be as fair and as equal as you are with any other age. So important things like helping employers be more flexible, because often what stops someone working into older age, they may not want to battle if they're having to go into work with the rush hour, for example. You know, they may want flexibility about hours and times of working or the way they work. They want the opportunity to learn new things. So it really is important that you don't take that opportunity away from people. They may well want the opportunity to think about the type of work they do as they go forward. So it may be that you want to actually modify the work or provide very good you know, seating at work, the sort of things that will enable you as an older person to really want to go into work. MOTs in midlife have become quite popular, looking after the health and well-being of the older workforce. So we've been doing a lot of work in that space, and then we've been working quite hard with some projects, one in the West Midlands, one in Manchester, where we're looking at how you enable people to return to work. What is it that an employer might have to do? So I think it's acknowledging that you do have to make an effort as an employer if you wish to encourage and retain an older workforce, because we saw in COVID that the people who have not returned to work after COVID have been more than ever the 50 plus. It's not been the other age groups, although we do have a problem with the very young because of mental health. So the younger workers have suffered more mental health wise in not returning to work. But the older worker, if they could afford it, many of them have said, well, I've had enough, you know, it's not attractive enough for me. And so you lose experience, you lose that intergenerational working, which is so important. You don't want a workplace that's either all young people or middle-aged people or 50 plus people. You want a workforce that is really intergenerational.
Absolutely. And Carol, you mentioned about flexibility, and I think one of our friends on the call, Bipin, has just put a question in the chat. And Bipin, I wonder if I can bring you in. I think your question really ties in very nicely here. Bipin, do you just want to put your question to Dame Carol?
Good evening to you. This is Bipin Dattani. I very much value the experience that the older people can bring. And may I remind everybody that older people sometimes can have a bit more time on their hands as well. So the experience and a bit more time. So those employers who will cater for the older workforce, what incentives can we give them so that they can continue to do so? And other employers, oh, wait a minute, I also want the same incentives.
Thank
Are you thinking that are you thinking the government should incentivize
Yes, somehow, yes.
employers to do this? I mean, I think one of the trials that has gone on in the West Midlands, which was funded by the government, not just particularly for older people, was incentivizing by supporting SMEs. This was mainly a trial for the smaller companies, with helping the provision of occupational health. And of course, that sort of thing, if a company has got easier access to good occupational health, that very much benefits keeping workers who are over 50, because that is a service that otherwise you're buying in. So I think that sometimes the government can, they may want to help with MOTs. You go again, having a midlife MOT again is something that I think an employee might value, and also gives the employer quite a lot of comfort. So but I think also trying to get employers to understand the value you get from an older worker. So if you like, the incentive might be you're going to get them, they'll probably be if they feel valued at work, they're going to turn up very regularly. You know, they're going to give you a great deal of themselves. So I think in and of itself, there's quite an incentive to give you a stable, mature, experienced workforce that can help you with your younger worker.
Great question from Bipin. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you equally to Carol for that great reply. So Carol, I'll take one or two questions from colleagues in a moment, but let me just ask you about one of your reports. So in 2008, you authored Working for Healthier Tomorrow, a report which focused on impact of sickness absence on health of the working age population and the economy. You made, Carol, a number of key recommendations, and I wonder if you have seen any shift in how employers support staff to come back to work when they are experiencing health issues. And Francesco, I've seen a lovely question from you, and I'll try and bring your question in just a wee moment. Carol,
yes,
please.
I mean, if you recall, I wrote that report towards the end of a Labour government. So it was written at that time. They accepted all the recommendations, and they did put a lot of resource, financial, into making those recommendations a reality. So, for example, instead of having a sick note, which tells you just how sick you are, the idea was that a general practitioner would indicate what support, they would write a fit note that what could you do, or what help would you need in order to be able to return to work. We instituted around the country really pilots on an early fit for work service, a service you could be referred into that would help you with what were two major problems at that time were musculoskeletal problems and mental ill health, were the two big buckets of problems that were keeping people from the workplace. There was also a lot of information in that report and recommendations around the employer. The great sadness for me is that all was going really pretty well until probably about 2013, and then one by one, the initiatives which were started in about 2010, except for the companies that of their own volition had started to do things, were pulled back. But what I did see was that, and to start with, it was mainly the private sector, but then later followed in the public sector, that the private sector started to understand that the health and well-being of their workforce, their physical and their mental health, the way they were managed, the way if you had good leadership and really good managers who really cared about and listened to their employees, and tried to really create a highly positive team spirit, you would be more productive. So you could make the business case. And we did develop a business calculator. And I saw a great improvement, which I think has been retained today. And then I saw that gradually move, particularly to start with, we did a lot of work with the NHS and with the voluntary sector. The greatest sadness to me today is when I look at the figures for sickness absence and the lack of disabled people being able to stay or return to work. The figures are worse than when I wrote my first review. That is a real awful sadness to me that we have slipped back. And if you look at the sickness absence figures, they are worse than they were in 2008. And that is, for me, such a waste, because it was a report that did change behavior and it did change attitude and it did change culture. And now we've got to start rebuilding again. I mean, the pandemic was partly to blame for that, but not all of it was the pandemic. It was happening before the pandemic, but it's been made much worse by the fact of the pandemic. But also we have a very weakened NHS that's really struggling to deliver. So if you have chronic conditions and if you're not well looked after quickly, it's very easy for you to fall out of work. Or if you're waiting for a hip operation, you know, or so many things that influence your ability to be in work. I think so there's a terrible coming together of some really pretty negative factors at the moment.
And to add to those negative factors, Carol, not just the pandemic, which has made things worse, but following from the pandemic, we have the long COVID, so phrased. And I guess the figures would be even worse if you bring long COVID and other related issues into the play.
No, I mean, long COVID does make it slightly worse, but some quite good analysis has shown it isn't the major driver. Caring responsibilities is also another driver, although not the major driver is the number of people with chronic conditions, and maybe more than one chronic condition, which, you know, has prevented them from returning to work, or indeed saying, look, I can't do this job anymore.
So, Carol, I'm going to take one or two questions from our friends, but how do we foster those good relationships? We know the challenge, particularly with the pandemic, as you have so alluded a moment ago. How do we go about fostering those good relationships and ensuring that, you know, despite the fact that we have this big challenge with the NHS and so on and so forth, what is it that we can all do to bring about that positivity?
Well, if I were running a company, or indeed if I were running a public sector organization, it is the organizational culture. It doesn't matter which organization it is. Do the leaders show that they care about the health and well-being of their workforce? Do they walk the walk and talk it? And then do you ensure that your managers, particularly your middle managers, are equipped with the training and the support to really support their teams, because it's at that middle level. Because what people want when they go to work, they want to be listened to, they want to be respected, they want to be part of a team, they want to have a voice. These are not things that money alone buys you. These are things that being an empathetic manager, and it's never been more important than now, because we have so much mental ill health around in the workplace, of anxiety, depression, and stress. And I think it's those sorts of things, and then making sure you do have available for your workforce interventions, which if possible are evidence-based. We don't have a lot of evidence-based ones. I don't mean, you know, putting on the Zumba class or the fresh fruit, and it is much more fundamental about how do you treat human beings. Are you treating them in the way you would like to be treated and respected? Do you make training opportunities available to them? Do you consider their flexibility of working times? None of this is rocket science. You know, it's about human beings. It's not, and of course, people are being desperately worried about the cost of living. So I couldn't deny that wages have been hugely important. We all know that. But that alone will not change the way you feel about your workplace. A good workplace is somewhere where you want to go and you feel valued. And
the workplace is where you spend best part of your day. So it is hugely important. Thank you, Carol. Let me bring our friend Francesco with his question, and then I'll bring Anita with her question. Thank you, Francesco, for waiting so patiently, and really good to see you this evening.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Carol. You mentioned age, but let's not forget that we've had the Equality Act 2010, and from that we've got age as a protected characteristic. When we take applications for people to provide lived experience representation on our community mental health framework pathway groups, all personal identifiers to include age and name are removed, so it's based on the criteria. So, you know, in some ways employers could do the same. In the same way, you know, working with the university, we look to try to get as many people that, to be the first in their family to go to university, and remove the barriers so that people from the Pride postcode, people that have been in the care of local authority. So there are ways of being able to embrace the diversity within a community, but don't follow the model that's in Blackpool, because the planners need to be taken to task for allowing so many off licenses and takeaways. Then we ask the question, why are the indices of deprivation so high in Blackpool? We need to ask the councillor that allowed such planning decision.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know whether Carol, you have any
No, I mean, I do take very seriously the last comment about, you know, Blackpool is a very deprived area that has got huge number of challenges, and one of the terrible things is, if you like, the quality of food that is often available, and you know, nutrition is terribly important for growing children. I mean, to enable children to eat well, and yet it's really hard to do that if you live in an area of great deprivation. And of course, we have seen a real increase in problems with alcohol, admissions to hospital with alcohol problems. Alcohol deaths have been on the increase. And in a way, the pandemic has been one of the drivers there, but I'm sure not the only one.
Thank you for that. Anita, I wonder if you would like to put your question to Carol, please.
Sorry, there's something wrong with the camera, so I won't be able to switch off.
That's okay. That's okay. Good to have your company this evening, Anita.
Thank you. My thoughts were that I come across a lot of carers even in my current work, and I often find that they're looking for something to do, and when you speak to them, they've got a history of a lot of skills, but the difficulty is that they may have other caring responsibility. For instance, I went to a carers hub today, and I could see that from, for today, that it was one of those, she's done so much work in the community and everywhere, yet she's at home. She was 60 plus, but she was so willing to do a lot more. Now, I thought that she was somebody who's employable because she had no other issues, but it's looking at how we support when people have caring duty as well. So she's looking after her husband. So that was one example. That, it's hard enough when you get into your 50s to find a job, to be honest. People will, the employers will be more likely to take on board somebody who's younger, who's got the IT skills, etc. And that I say by certain experience as well. So lots of things need to sort of be looked into, and whether we'll ever get there is a question mark. And I'll stop there before any kind of negativity comes in.
Well, I mean, one of the things we're doing at the Centre for Aging Better, because what you say is absolutely true, is in January we're launching, and with the support of Age UK, we're going to have a big campaign on ageism. And ageism in all its manifestations, because you're quite right, there is absolute ageism in the workplace, and we need to get people to think about this and to realize that they often are ageist without possibly believing they are. But you see ageism in healthcare, you see ageism in terms of our television screens. You never see, well, very rarely do you see an older woman reading the news. It is very uncommon, and so it comes up in so many places, and it's really, how do we educate employers that an older person could be a very good worker? They may not want to work full time, but it's trying to get flexibility of hours and types of work. And as you rightly say, this is not a quick fix. We have got a lot of work to do to move this agenda, but we are certainly going to have a national campaign that I hope will at least begin to address some of these issues.
Thank you for that, Carol. And indeed, thank you, Anita, for your question. Grateful to you. I'm going to make some progress because time is fast running out, and I wanted to cover one or two other topics that Carol has also been, has huge impact. So Carol, your work on the international drugs market is absolutely exceptional. And I just wanted to understand, what did looking into that show you, and was it what you were expecting?
It's a very good question. This work has really mattered to me enormously, and I got interested in it first in 2016 when, for David Cameron, I did a review of the benefit system and those people who were in the benefit system that we knew had an addiction problem, whether that was to drugs or to alcohol. And out of that review came a very major trial of using a system called IPS, Individual Placement Support, to see if we could help people dependent on either alcohol or drugs, not only into treatment and recovery, but into work. And I started to get a sense of what this whole world was about. And I kept close to that trial. I used to visit treatment centers. What started to worry me enormously was that we do not treat addiction, whether it's alcohol addiction or drugs, as a chronic condition. A drug addiction is a chronic health condition, but we have so stigmatized people who have an addiction. We do not treat them like we would treat a diabetic patient. We do not think we have a responsibility not just to take them through one course of treatment, but to be with them on the journey when they might relapse, just as you might relapse if you're diabetic, insulin-dependent diabetic. You may get out of control. And
why do you think, Carol, sorry, Carol, why do you think there is such a lack of sympathy, such an underlying lack of sympathy, whether it's drug addiction, or whether it is alcohol addiction, or even gaming
yes, no. I think, of course, with drug addiction, perhaps slightly more than alcohol addiction, although it is the damage that people who are addicted do not only to themselves, but to their family, to society. 50% of murders are associated with drugs. 49% of serious acquisitive crime have a drug association, and a third of our prison places are taken up by drug-dependent people. And therefore, there is a criminality that we have associated with it, I think, that is very difficult to separate out. And I think, therefore, rather than seeing that once you are truly addicted, there isn't a choice here. You don't choose to go on being addicted, and you really need a lot of very specialized and concentrated help to stop it. And when they asked me to look into the problem, because drug deaths were increasing, deaths on the street were increasing, the amount of drugs coming into the country was increasing, and the amount of different sorts of new drugs were increasing. And really what I found was a terrible situation where most of the systems were broken. And what I really tried to do I analyzed the problem in part one, and the market, and where the drugs were coming from, what they were worth, what damage they did. And then in part two, I tried to look at what was needed in our treatment and recovery system, and then made the recommendations. And I am as determined as I can be that we will try and really improve the situation such that we can try to give a much more holistic, whole systems treatment and recovery system to people who are addicted, whether it be with drugs and alcohol. And then, of course, there's the addiction to games and gaming. And I've been doing some work in prisons in the last few months for the government. And that's made me even more determined, because if we think it's bad in the community, let me assure you it's worse in our prisons, which at the moment, as you know, are very overcrowded. It's difficult to get prison officers. It's difficult to get probation officers. And people are on this terrible circuit of they commit a crime, they go into prison for a few months. They don't get what I would call a therapeutic experience. They come out of prison homeless, only to repeat the cycle. So for me, it is very, it matters to me terribly to try and bring about a change in this area. I like impossible problems. I like trying to change people's views of things, and I'm really trying terribly hard to change the culture that surrounds drug addiction.
Thank you very much for that. Let me bring Surjit. Surjit, really good to see you this evening, and thank you for joining. If you want to put your question to Dame Carol, please.
Thank you, Ketan, for organising this, and such a pleasure to be here and to listen to you, Dame Carol Black. You know, you always, it's such a joy to listen to you and to hear all your views. So yeah, I'm an outreach worker, and I work closely with parents, you know, who want support around their alcohol use. And a lot of the parents that I work with, you know, they have social care involvement, and it's just so, you know, sometimes obviously the children have to be separated from their parents, and in Hounslow at least, or near us, there's not really any family rehabs that I'm aware of. I know of one in Scotland, and I was just wondering what your views were, you know, on like the whole family getting help as a unit.
I know, it's a very good point. And what you probably know, once in 2013, really when austerity started to come in a big way, the rehabilitation centres, particularly the residential ones that we did have, and I think we had 2 that were for families. There was not much even then, but over the years from 2013 to when I started the review in 2019, most of our residential rehabilitation places had closed. Never mind, could we do it for a family? And there is now money in the system, because the government did give 930 million after my report for the whole system. And the Department of Health through OHID, which of course runs the drug strategy and works with the local authority, they have now put a target with each local authority about starting to really provide residential rehabilitation. Now, I don't know that that necessarily includes families, but I think it is a very important aspect. And I didn't do enough in my report on families. When I look back, there were several things I missed out. One was trauma. I didn't do enough on trauma, and I didn't do enough on families. But sometimes the situation, as you say, is so complex that you can only do it by thinking about a family situation. I'm also quite keen. I chair the board of Think Ahead, which is mental health social work training. I would quite like to see a mental health addiction social worker, because I think, again, things that provide things for the family in one place, you don't want to keep sending people all over the place to get help.
Absolutely.
They can't do it. You know that better than I. And so I think we need to be imaginative about how we do it, but rehabilitation has sadly been almost destroyed in England. And I think you may be right that in Scotland, they may not have suffered quite so much. I've visited rehabilitation places in Scotland, even in the last 2 years, whereas I haven't been to any rehabilitation unit. I've been to one in England, but that's all.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sujit, for that lovely question. Faye, you have a similar question. Let me bring you in, Faye. Again, so good to see you this evening. Faye, are you able to unmute yourself? Okay, while you're trying to unmute yourself, let me just put another question to Dame Carol, Faye, while you're trying to unmute yourself. So, Carol, we know how busy you are, and we know that you're constantly and continuously traveling. I think you were in Peterborough earlier today, delivering a lecture there, and I just wanted to understand, from all the various visits that you are constantly making, what does good look like to you, and perhaps you can share what is the uniqueness or the specialness of that particular service for those who are experiencing or receiving treatment or something related to drugs or addictions in UK, please.
Well, what really good will look like when we can get there is that we provide a proper holistic service. So it has been conventional that we provide particularly treatment for opioid dependent people. So that we provide methadone as substitution therapy. For me, that is only the very beginning of drug treatment. We have to be able to provide for all those people who take drugs which are not heroin. So we've got to be able to have a scope of drugs for which we can provide treatment support, which means we have to have very good psychological support in there, because as you know, there is no pharmacological treatment of cocaine or any of the other many drugs that people take. We've got to be able to get integrated mental health and trauma services. You've got to think about the recovery services that you're going to provide. Good for me is doing a holistic job. And then I'm afraid you also have to think about getting people something meaningful to do or work. And you have to think about safe housing, because if people are living in a hostel where other people are shooting heroin, they will shoot heroin. None of us would be strong enough, you know, if we had an addiction problem, if we were placed in a place where other people are still taking drugs. So it is a big ask, but that's what we're trying to do with the strategy. We're trying through drug partnership boards in our local authorities to really make that service that which will hold somebody safe and enable them to travel the journey of recovery.
Thank you for that. Let me bring Eddie Chan. Eddie Chan had a point around dementia and perhaps another area that you may have some views on, Carol. Eddie?
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute at the moment. I just done that, I think. I tried to find my camera.
That's fine.
Yeah, it's okay.
Really good to see you.
Katrina, thank you. I got a really bad cough and itchy throat at the moment. Do you mind just reading my questions to Carol now? And I expand it slightly more and clarify my points, please.
I will indeed. So let me just find your question. So Carol, our friend asks about dementia. So he says dementia is the biggest killer now in the UK. We have more than 430 annual nurses in this country to support and help families that have someone living with dementia. Very few of those nurses can speak a foreign language. So BME groups in this country are disadvantaged. I would like to hear Carol's views, please, how we can help the situation.
Yeah.
I mean, I really know very little about this. I mean, I've not done, none of the work I've done, I regret to say, has been at all in the area of dementia. The only sort of lateral but perhaps related thing in which you needed really skilled workforce to is in dealing with drug dependency for ethnic minority groups. They told me very firmly that their needs, their cultural needs, and an understanding of their religious needs were not met by the workforce that we provided. So again, matching your workforce to the needs of the particular condition is certainly, it's not okay as yet in drug dependency, and I imagine that is true in conditions like dementia, and it is sometimes extremely difficult to get the workforce that you need to meet the needs of the patient. But I have to say, dementia is not anything I've done any work on at all.
Thank you for that. I always say at every single event like this that 1 hour is never enough, and sadly 1 hour is certainly not enough this evening. We are very close to our hour, but let me just ask a final question, Carol. As I've said in my opening remarks, you do some amazing work, and I just wanted to find out, what do you do to relax, please? And do you get time to relax? One of the leadership roles that you have is that you chair the British Library Board. And I wonder, what's your favorite book?
I don't know that I have I don't have a favorite book. That's the truth. I mean, what do I do to relax? I run. I try to run 3 times a week. I run 3 miles when I run. I love walking, and we walk in the well, we used to walk in the high mountains. As we've got older, we've walking in, not, we don't walk in such high Alps, or we go to the Dolomites, but we tend to walk in the lower levels. But I love being in the open and in the mountains. I really, so we go to Scotland to walk, and Yorkshire to walk. I have a great passion for the opera. And it's a wonderful escape. So opera and music matter to me a lot. I grew up in a house with one book, the Bible. So in the British Library, I have millions of these. I never read the children's books because we didn't have them at home. So I now feel I'm completely surrounded by any book almost that I would wish to ever pull off a shelf and have a look at. Although, as you know, the British Library is not a lending library. It is. Anyway, that's what I do to relax. I try to garden. I'm not a very good gardener, but I do try to do a bit of that.
Thank you very much. Carol, it's been an absolute joy to have you this evening. I can't thank you enough. And I'm sure everybody on the screen will agree with me, and all the others who are joining us on various different platforms, and all the other people who will be tuning in to listen to this after this evening will want to join me in thanking you enormously for your company this evening. I'm now going to pass you to Donna for one or two quick closing remarks, please. Donna?
Right, thank you so much. First of all, obviously, huge thanks to Dame Carol for an absolutely fascinating hour. And can I say, as an older woman myself, I really appreciate how much the discussion today was about age discrimination. And I think Dame Carol reminds us all that older women have so much to give to society and to the world, and you should listen to us more. I'd like to thank all of you for coming on this kind of giving up an hour of your time on this kind of dark and cold evening. As always, thank Ketan for a year of amazing, wonderful speakers for these events. And thank Clea, who does such a good job of making sure these events run absolutely seamlessly, which she does on top of her really busy day job. There's no December event because everybody will be too busy, but I know we have an amazing lineup of speakers already for next year. So please do look out soon for information about our January event. So with that, thank you very much to everybody, and just to wish everybody a good festive season, end of year, whatever this period of time means to you, and see you all in 2024. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.